It began not with a bang, but with a whisper of light against the dawn. I remember standing on the balcony of my small home, a simple ritual with a warm cup of tea, watching the sun begin its daily climb over the horizon. But on that morning, September 22, 2025, something was different. There, hanging in the pale blue canvas of the pre-dawn sky, was a new star. It wasn't twinkling like the distant suns of other galaxies. No, this one had a fierce, unwavering intensity. It was a pinprick of pure, white fire, a celestial diamond that had no business being there. It felt both beautiful and profoundly wrong, a violation of the familiar cosmic order I had spent my life studying and cherishing. My heart, a simple pump of muscle and blood, began to beat a little faster. As a physicist, my mind immediately raced through the possibilities. A supernova? Too close, too bright, and we would have had warnings. A piece of orbital debris? It was far too brilliant for that. My instincts, honed by years of staring into the vast emptiness of space, told me this was something else. This was an intruder. It was a visitor from the cold, dark expanse between the planets, a relic from the formation of our solar system, now making its final dramatic entrance onto the world stage. The morning birds were singing their usual chorus, oblivious to the silent drama unfolding above them. I left my tea to grow cold and rushed back inside, my mind a whirlwind of calculations and trajectories. I pulled up the live feed from the major sky surveys, my fingers flying across the keyboard. The alerts were already screaming across the networks, a digital chorus of panic from observatories around the globe. It had a name, 2025 RV1, but the media, in their typical flair for the dramatic, had latched onto a more ancient, more ominous name plucked from the pages of a forgotten prophecy. They called it Wormwood. It was a name that felt heavy, laden with a sense of dread that science alone couldn't quite explain. It was no longer just a rock, it was a destiny. Looking back at the screen, I saw its projected path. It wasn't going to be a near miss. It wasn't going to skip off our atmosphere like a stone on a pond. It was on a direct collision course. The mathematics were as cold and unforgiving as the vacuum of space itself. This tiny, beautiful star, this brilliant speck of light that had so captivated me only moments before, was a harbinger. It was the universe reminding us, in the most spectacular way imaginable, of its immense power and our own delicate, fragile existence on this small, blue marble. The dawn was breaking, but it felt like twilight was already beginning to fall. My workplace, the European Cascade Observatory, became the epicenter of our world. Nestled high in the remote mountains, its great white dome was usually a place of quiet contemplation, of patient data gathering. But that day, it was a hive of frantic energy. The air buzzed with a mixture of scientific curiosity and palpable fear. We were scientists, trained to observe, to measure, to remain objective. Yet we were also human. We had families, homes, and a shared planet that was now in the crosshairs of a cosmic projectile. Every screen showed the same thing, Wormwood, growing larger with each passing hour, its light now visible even in the full glare of the midday sun. My role was to analyze the asteroid's composition using spectroscopy. As its light passed through the prism of our instruments, it broke down into a rainbow of data, a fingerprint of its chemical makeup. The results that came back were chilling. The asteroid was rich in certain heavy metals and unusual organic compounds, things we wouldn't expect to see in such concentrations. It was a carbonaceous chondrite, a primitive type of asteroid but laced with something more. We detected significant signatures of what appeared to be complex sulfides and other volatile elements that, upon entering our atmosphere and waterways, could have profoundly toxic effects. It was as if it were designed to be a poison pill for a planetary ecosystem. We ran simulations, hundreds of them, each one a desperate attempt to find a flaw in our initial predictions. We modeled the atmospheric entry, the angle of impact, the energy release. The computer models painted a grim picture. The asteroid was approximately 1 kilometer in diameter, not a planet killer like the one that wiped out the dinosaurs, but large enough to cause catastrophic regional devastation and global consequences. Its target was a vast watershed, the headwaters of several major rivers that supplied fresh water to hundreds of millions of people across the continent. It seemed impossibly, cruelly precise, a surgical strike against the planet's lifeblood. Throughout the day, we communicated with colleagues across the globe. Voices from NASA, from Roscosmos, from the CNSA in Beijing, all sharing the same data, the same conclusions. There was a strange camaraderie in our shared helplessness. For all our technology, for all our knowledge of the cosmos, we were reduced to being mere spectators. We could do nothing but watch and record the event. We were about to have a front row seat to the kind of event that created worlds and ended them. The sun began to set, and as darkness fell, Wormwood no longer looked like a star. It now resembled a small, angry moon. As night deepened, the spectacle truly began. Wormwood was no longer a point of light, it had a discernible shape. Through the observatory's main telescope, it looked like a jagged, tumbling mountain of rock and ice, glowing with an internal, malevolent heat. It had entered the upper reaches of our atmosphere, the thin, tenuous envelope of gas that protects us from the harshness of space. That protective shield was now becoming a source of friction, a break that was heating the asteroid to thousands of degrees Celsius. It was beginning to burn, not like a gentle candle, but like a colossal celestial forge. The initial glow was a brilliant white, a color so pure, it hurt the eyes. But as it descended deeper, the colors began to change. Streaks of green and blue flared from its surface, the spectral signatures of vaporizing copper and iron. It was a terrifyingly beautiful fireworks display, a silent cosmic light show. Then came the sound. It wasn't a roar, not yet. It was a low, pervasive hum that seemed to vibrate in your bones, a sound that traveled not just through the air but through the very ground beneath our feet. The atmosphere itself was groaning under the strain of this violent intrusion. We watched on our monitors as the asteroid began to shed layers of itself. Huge chunks broke away, creating a retinue of smaller fireballs that trailed behind the main body like burning embers from a great torch. Each one was a meteor in its own right, streaking across the sky in a dazzling, deadly procession. It looked exactly as the ancient texts had described it, a great star, burning like a lamp. It was a mountain of fire falling from heaven. The sheer scale of it was almost impossible for the mind to process. Our brains are not wired to comprehend such a thing. We can understand the numbers, but to see it, to feel it, is another matter entirely. In those final minutes it filled the sky. It was no longer an object in the sky, it was the sky. The light it cast was brighter than a full moon, painting the landscape in an eerie, flickering orange glow. The shadows of the mountains danced and stretched as if alive. The low hum had now escalated into a deafening, continuous roar, the sound of 1 billion tons of air being ripped apart. We were all silent in the control room, our faces bathed in the light of the screens, which in turn were bathed in the light of the falling star. There was nothing left to say. We were simply witnesses at the end of a long, cosmic journey. The end came with a flash of impossible light. For a single, eternal second the world turned white. It was not the gentle white of a cloudy day, but a searing, absolute whiteness that erased everything from view. Every sensor in the observatory was instantly overloaded, screaming with data that was off the charts. Even with our eyes squeezed shut, the light penetrated our eyelids, a brilliant flash imprinted on the inside of our minds. It was the raw, unchained energy of the cosmos, the kinetic energy of a mountain moving at 20 kilometers per second, being converted into heat and light in a fraction of an instant. There was no sound, only the light, a profound, world-ending silence. Then, the shockwave hit us. It was not a sound, it was a physical blow. The entire observatory building, a structure of reinforced concrete and steel anchored deep into the mountain, lurched sideways, as if struck by a giant's fist. A deep, guttural boom, more felt than heard, rolled through the earth, shaking the very foundations of the world. In the control room, monitors shattered, equipment toppled from racks, and a shower of ceiling tiles rained down upon us. We were thrown from our chairs, a chaotic jumble of limbs and scientific instruments. The power of the impact, hundreds of kilometers away, had reached us with the force of a major earthquake. When the shaking subsided, a new sound began. It was the sound of the world screaming, a low, continuous roar that grew in intensity, the sound of the atmosphere rushing back into the vacuum created by the asteroid's passage. We stumbled back to the auxiliary monitors, the ones running on emergency power. The first images came from a high-altitude drone we had positioned near the projected impact zone. The screen showed a scene from hell. A colossal plume of steam, dust, and vaporized rock was ascending into the upper atmosphere, a mushroom cloud that dwarfed any nuclear detonation in human history. It was churning, boiling, and glowing with a terrifying internal heat. The impact crater itself was a wound upon the face of the Earth, a gaping chasm dozens of kilometers wide. The asteroid had struck the Great Northern Lakes, the source of the continent's major rivers. In an instant, trillions of liters of water had been flash vaporized, blasted into the sky along with pulverized rock and the asteroid's own material. The energy released was equivalent to thousands of the most powerful nuclear bombs ever created. It was an extinction-level event on a regional scale, and the global consequences were only just beginning to unfold. We had witnessed the hammer blow. Now, we would have to endure the fallout. The immediate aftermath was, honestly, a study in atmospheric chaos. The colossal plume of debris and superheated steam just kept climbing, punching through the troposphere and spreading out into the stratosphere like a dark, cancerous stain. This vast cloud, which was just absolutely loaded with the pulverized remains of the asteroid and the Earth's crust, began to block out the sun. Day turned into this eerie, sort of permanent twilight. But, the most insidious effect wasn't the darkness. It was what was actually falling from it. A fine grayish-yellow dust started to settle everywhere, coating the landscape in a toxic shroud. This was the material of wormwood, now scattered to the winds. Our remote sensors placed along the river systems began to send back their first readings, and honestly, the data was horrifying. The pH levels of the water were plummeting, which is a clear sign of extreme acidification. The chemical composition was changing at an alarming rate. The heavy metals and sulfur compounds that we detected with our spectrographs were now dissolving into the water. Arsenic, lead, and other toxic elements, once locked away in the asteroid's rocky matrix, were being released into the very headwaters that fed a continent. The rivers, which were once sources of life, were turning into vectors of poison. The name wormwood is believed to come from the plant Artemisia absinthium, known for its intense bitterness. It was honestly a shockingly apt description. Reports started flooding in from downstream communities. The water had taken on a strange metallic taste, a profound bitterness that made it undrinkable. And it wasn't just unpleasant, it was lethal. The initial analyses from local water treatment facilities confirmed our worst fears. The concentrations of toxic compounds were far beyond any level that could be filtered by conventional means. The water had been fundamentally and chemically altered on a massive scale. This process is, unfortunately, a known consequence of certain types of impact events. When a sulfur-rich body strikes a body of water, it can create vast quantities of sulfuric acid. This acid rain, or in this case acid river, decimates aquatic life and renders the water unsafe for consumption. What we were witnessing was a textbook example, but on a scale that was honestly difficult to comprehend. It wasn't a localized chemical spill, it was the poisoning of an entire circulatory system of a continent. The great fountain of waters, as the old book called it, had been corrupted at its very source. The ecological collapse was swift and brutal. In the days that followed the impact, the life-giving rivers became silent graveyards. First, the fish died. They washed ashore in their millions, a silver tide of death lining the banks for hundreds of kilometers. Then the animals that drank from the rivers began to perish. Herds of deer, wild boar and livestock were found collapsed near the water's edge, their bodies contorted. Birds that fed on the poisoned fish fell from the sky. The intricate web of life, so resilient and yet so fragile, was being unpicked thread by thread, starting from its most fundamental component, water. The impact on humanity was no less devastating. The initial shock and awe of the celestial event quickly gave way to a grim, desperate reality. The official warnings were stark and unequivocal. Do not drink the water. Do not use it for cooking or bathing. It is poison. But for millions of people living along the riverbanks in rural communities without access to bottled reserves, there was no alternative. The news channels began to show harrowing images of people racked with sickness, suffering from acute heavy metal poisoning. It was a slow, agonizing process that overwhelmed the unprepared medical systems. The sky remained a strange, bruised color, a perpetual twilight cast by the stratospheric dust veil. The sun was a pale watercolor smudge, its warmth diminished. Photosynthesis slowed and plants began to wither. Crops in the fields, irrigated with the now toxic river water, turned brown and died. The fine, bitter dust that had settled on everything found its way into our lungs, causing respiratory illnesses to spike. It was a multi-pronged assault on the biosphere. The air was tainted, the water was poisoned, and the light was fading. We were living in the shadow of Wormwood. As scientists, we continued our work, but it felt different. It was no longer about abstract discovery, it was about survival. We were analyzing the poison in our own environment, charting the spread of our own demise. Every data point, every chemical analysis was another nail in the coffin of the world we once knew. The bitterness was not just in the water, it was in our hearts. A profound sense of loss for the vibrant living world that had been so carelessly and suddenly erased by a random act of cosmic violence. We were documenting an apocalypse in real time. In the face of such an unprecedented disaster, humanity reacted in predictable yet powerful ways. The first response was a massive, coordinated effort of aid and evacuation. Military transports and civilian trucks, laden with vast quantities of bottled water and emergency rations, rumbled day and night towards the affected zones. Huge refugee camps sprang up on high ground, far from the poisoned rivers, becoming sprawling cities of tents and temporary shelters. It was a logistical operation on a scale never seen before, a testament to our ability to cooperate when our collective survival is at stake. There was a sense of global unity born from shared catastrophe. But alongside the cooperation, fear and chaos began to fester. In the cities, panic buying stripped supermarket shelves bare in hours. The price of clean water skyrocketed, becoming a currency more valuable than gold. Armed guards were posted at reservoirs and municipal water supplies. A black market for clean water emerged, run by opportunists preying on the desperation of others. We saw the best of humanity in the selfless volunteers and rescue workers, and the worst in the hoarders and profiteers. The crisis acted as a great filter, revealing the true nature of individuals and societies. My own experience became surreal. Confined to the observatory, which had its own independent water recycling system, we were an island of relative safety in a sea of poison. We communicated with the outside world through satellite links, our screens filled with images of suffering and chaos. We were analysts, detached from the immediate struggle, yet the emotional weight was immense. We would speak to government emergency committees, providing data on the spread of the toxins, and then minutes later, receive a personal message from a relative asking if it was safe to drink the tap water 1,000 kilometers away. The line between the professional and the personal had been completely erased. The psychological toll was enormous. A deep collective trauma settled upon the population. People would stare at the strange, dim sky with a mixture of fear and resentment. The asteroid was gone, but its presence lingered everywhere, in the color of the water, the taste of the air, the constant anxiety. Conspiracy theories flourished, as they always do in times of confusion. Some saw it as a divine judgment, others as a secret military experiment gone wrong. People needed a narrative, a reason, something to make sense of the senseless. For many, the simple, terrifying truth that we live in a cosmic shooting gallery was too much to bear. Weeks turned into months. The initial phase of chaos and frantic response slowly gave way to a new, grim normality. The dust in the stratosphere began to thin, and the sun's light returned, but it seemed different, weaker. The world was quieter now. The birdsong that once filled the mornings was greatly diminished. The constant hum of traffic and industry along the great river valleys had fallen silent. It was the silence of absence, the sound of a world holding its breath, waiting for a recovery that seemed impossibly distant. The poisoned rivers flowed on, their waters still bitter, a constant physical reminder of the wound we had suffered. Life at the observatory took on a monastic quality. Our work shifted from emergency response to long-term monitoring and remediation research. We studied the hardy extremophiles, the tiny microbes that were beginning to adapt to the toxic water, hoping to find clues for bioremediation. We modeled the long-term climate effects of the dust veil and the atmospheric chemistry changes. Our days were structured and filled with purpose, but a profound melancholy hung over us. We were like the survivors of a shipwreck, diligently taking inventory on a desert island, aware of the vast, empty ocean that surrounded us. I found myself spending long hours in the observatory's library, poring over old texts, not just scientific journals but history, philosophy, and mythology. I reread the passage from Revelation, the one that had given the asteroid its name. A great star fell from heaven, blazing like a torch, and it fell on a third of the rivers and on the springs of water. The name of the star is Wormwood. A third of the waters became wormwood, and many people died from the water because it had been made bitter. It was chillingly accurate, not as a prophecy, but as an observation. Perhaps the writer had witnessed a small or similar event in the ancient past, a memory passed down through generations. The experience had fundamentally changed my perspective as a scientist. I had always seen the universe as a place of immense beauty and wonder, governed by elegant mathematical laws. It still was. But I now understood, in a visceral way, that those same laws were entirely indifferent to us. The universe can create a spiral galaxy of breathtaking beauty with one hand and hurl a rock that poisons a world with the other. There is no malice, no intent. There is only physics. And we, in our brief, flickering moment of consciousness, are caught in the middle of it all, small figures on a vast and unpredictable cosmic stage. Today the world is healing, but it is forever changed. The great rivers are slowly being cleansed by the planet's vast water cycle, but the scars of Wormwood remain, and now, they are joined by something even more profound. The ecological dead zones remind us of our vulnerability, but now, they are also places of pilgrimage, sites where the miraculous has touched the earth. We have learned to live differently, with a new reverence for our planet's resources, and a new awe for the heavens, especially after the return of Christ. Our investments in planetary defense continue, but now they are guided by a deeper sense of stewardship, inspired by the presence of the divine among us. The global network of telescopes and interceptors stands as both a shield and a symbol, a reminder that we are watched over, but also responsible for one another. Like a homeowner who, after a devastating flood, finally builds a levee, we have learned to prepare, but now, we do so with hope, not just fear. The lesson was hard and bitter, but it was not the end. The Wormwood event was a tragedy of unimaginable proportions, a story of loss and suffering. Yet in the midst of our mourning, the world was shaken again by the second coming. In the aftermath, as we rebuilt, we witnessed miracles and signs that transcended science, and hope was rekindled in ways we had never imagined. Nations set aside their differences not only to face a common threat, but to welcome a new era, one marked by unity under a higher purpose. Communities came together, inspired by compassion and the teachings of Christ, to support one another as never before. New technologies for water purification and restoration emerged, but so did new ways of healing hearts and spirits. From the depths of despair, we found a renewed sense of shared purpose, and a faith that transcended boundaries. We recognized, more than ever, that we are all passengers on this one tiny spacecraft called Earth, now united by a revelation that changed everything. And we must work together, not just to protect our world, but to honor the gift of life and the promise of redemption. For me, the journey has been a profound one. Science and faith, once separate, now walk hand in hand. I still look up at the night sky, but now with a sense of awe that is both cosmic and spiritual. I see it as a dynamic, sometimes violent place, but also as a canvas for the miraculous. Its beauty is undiminished. If anything, it is now illuminated by a new light. Every sunrise, every moment feels like a gift, evidence of grace in a fragile world. To know that our existence is so improbable, so fragile, and now so redeemed, makes every moment infinitely more precious. We are the universe's way of knowing itself, and now, witnesses to a promise fulfilled, a brief flowering of consciousness in an immense and ancient cosmos, now touched by the eternal. Our purpose is clearer than ever, to bear witness, to learn, to love, and to protect this miracle of life. We are called to nurture, to heal, and to cherish all that has been entrusted to us. The fall of Wormwood was a cosmic warning, but the second coming was a cosmic answer. The message was written not just in the laws of physics, but now, in the fulfillment of prophecy. We are not the masters of this universe, we are its stewards and now its witnesses to the divine. Our intelligence and our ability to cooperate remain our shields, but now we are guided by a greater light. In the face of the vast, dark void, the most powerful force we have is the love and hope we share, now magnified by the presence of Christ among us. That is the lesson of the star that fell, the promise fulfilled, and the hope for our future, on earth and beyond. And now, with the defeat of the devil, the Antichrist, and the false prophet, the world stands truly free, evil has been cast down, and a new era of hope and redemption has begun.